Hey everybody, welcome back to another week of Media Ethics. Like I said last week, we're actually getting pretty close to the midway point, and actually in just a couple of weeks, I will be actually sending you the study guide for the midterm exam, and you'll have actually, including spring break, you'll have essentially, is it actually a couple of weeks I'll be doing this? Actually, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I should say. I haven't decided yet. I'll be sending you the study guide, but you'll have at least 2 weeks, maybe three. I have to actually figure out a schedule um, to study for this thing. Um, you're definitely going to get it. You'll have at least 3 weeks, I should say. It'll probably be because you'll definitely get it the week before spring break starts. Then you'll have spring break, and then the exam will actually be given out on March 27th. Okay, so plenty of time. Pretty much dedicating the whole month of March to that. So my estimation, you'll probably get the study guide actually probably around March 10th, so about 3 weeks. All right, so up until then, again, it's all about just like keeping pace with the readings, these discussions on them. Again, highlighting what I feel are maybe some of the most important points brought out. Again, we're kind of going macro to micro. We first explored about like what is ethics, how it's applied to the media, how it's interpreted by the so-called experts out there, the philosophers, that sort of thing. How it's applied. Now we're in the phase of how it's applied in the media and the sorts of decisions that have to be made based on ethical principles and maybe your own personal ethical principles. But of course, the thing to do right now again is just to keep doing those discussion points because I'm going to keep supplying them. Remember in the rubric, I said 90% essentially is what I'm looking for in terms of participation in those, at least 90% of participation in those discussion points. It doesn't immediately translate into a 90% grade or A for class participation, but it will definitely give that a boost. Okay, so I'm looking for at least 90% participation. Okay. Let's look at the now again, I'm doing this over the weekend, so I am actually going to be posting a new discussion point, which I'll get to, but we still have this one available here, so let's actually look at that one. Okay, first, this one's due at the end of Monday. Are the media doing a good job developing sources? Does the media too often try to develop their own narrative? Okay, so it's actually kind of connected to what we're going to talk about in chapter 7. And that is basically the whole idea, like what the Socratic method of basically, well, the Socratic method is actually deals with doctors, but the Socratic philosophy of basically, too much research is never enough. So, basically having like some sort of like story that basically doesn't have like a balanced narrative, doesn't have a enough sources, that sort of thing. Maybe he has sources that are kind of like railroaded to say things. Is that the fair thing to do in terms of like, and basically having the media create their own narrative? Is that the right thing for the media to do? So Hannah, who always comes in there first. Thanks, Hannah. In my opinion, although determining whether the media does a good job developing sources depends on each individual news organization, overall, the media is failing. That's how it seems like most people feel. Some news media, like Fox News, do not provide strong sources, as they tend to pick and choose people with extreme positions, either adhering to their own conservative agenda or initiating a heated argument between sources. Yeah, it seems like again that's what they've been calling almost like infotainment, kind of segment of news, and that is that basically now it's all about kind of yelling and screaming, that sort of thing. I heard somebody was talking. I think it was actually some comedian was talking about how he was being interviewed on Fox News, and like 10 years ago, and there was some speech from Obama that was being, and nobody was watching the speech, but it was almost like the people there had like some sort of prepared remarks to respond to it anyway and yell about him. Bill O'Reilly, the former host who sex abuse allegations or something, got him out of there. He had a prepared script. He just immediately he was totally not paying attention to what Obama was saying, went on there and just started ripping it into him. So it's almost like there is some sort of narrative, but it's almost like a brand. Alex Beatty, is that how you say your name, Alex? The media has done a lackluster job in developing and using sources. Upon doing research, many political outlets use biased sources to make bold claims to persuade their target audience. It's interesting. I was actually listening to the radio the other day about this whole balloon thing, which I'm sure you've been hearing about. And there's even people like pushing this whole theory about maybe there's aliens involved, and I can't believe this is happening, but whatever. Maybe, and then this one radio host was kind of laughing about it, and he was basically saying, maybe like before we die, we'll learn that there is like life on other planets or something like that. But this just doesn't do it. So, apparently somebody asked that question at a White House press conference or something like that. So, and then of course there's like, and I'm not necessarily saying that Biden's doing a good job in this, but there's like some narrative out there basically saying that Biden should be shooting all these down, or maybe starting war with China or something like that. And it's like, it's almost like they're creating like maybe some sort of crisis that may not be there. So, anyway, let's go back to the discussion points. So the new one I'm going to have for you guys, which will be due February 27th. And if you could just hold on for 1 second. All right, sorry about that. Anyway, so let's go back to where we were, and this will be due. It's not posted yet, but should news organization pay for news sources due February 27th? Okay, so this is gonna be related to what we're talking about. So it's kind of an extension of the one we just had, but it actually goes even deeper into this whole idea of like, actually, yes, news organizations, actually, there are ones out there that pay for them. And it's typically like your National Enquirer or stuff like that. But then it'll even go farther, and you'll even hear about like CNN or something like that paying for news sources. So, does that kind of shade or color what is the news? And we're going to get into that a bit today. Okay. So let's actually look at chapter 7. And after that, all we have to do is talk about chapters 8 and 9. And actually in between the readings and also the I should say the study guide I'm going to release for the midterm, I'm going to have an extra credit opportunity, which I'll discuss in the coming weeks. So, all right, so let's go. Working with sources is the title, okay? And a lot of this chapter deals with like how much is enough, or how much, how much do you really need in terms of like, in terms of like getting like just down to the bottom of the story, and this is actually a good chapter to read in today's age, because too often I feel like there's media out there that just basically do not do a good job in terms of like actually getting enough sources for stories, and you especially see that matters involving the police. You see that with like personal attacks, the whole thing with like Trump and like how he was just basically using Twitter and now just his own social media just as like a constant attack machine. And then like just some people just go out there and just repeat what he says. I mean, do we have to like keep doing that? Do we have to keep chasing that attack? Do we have to keep getting the other person? And then there's so many times he says these things and there's no balance to it, which is actually one of the big problems you could argue with social media, is that there's so many like personal attacks out there that there's just too many of them to actually just basically respond to. So anyway, I mean, it talks a bit about like the importance of making sure that you have enough sources at the ready for when that happens. Okay. And it's interesting, is it's becoming too dependent. Sometimes there's people who become a little bit too cozy. I meant to actually call this up before. A few years ago, like sometimes people get a little bit too cozy with their sources, and I feel like there's sometimes they feel like they're almost afraid to attack, those people, because maybe they want to stay friends with them. Maybe they actually like, they feel like they're gonna burn a source, as they call it. And I always think back. I know it's a sports thing. It's really kind of a niche thing. So, but I always think back to this. There's a sports host by the name of Mike Francesa, who who did an interview with Alex Rodriguez a few years back, a long time ago, and about how he basically he really played nice with him, and I think this actually helped Mike Francisco get fired by Yes. But anyway, it was on a sports talk radio station, and everybody knew Alex Rodriguez was lying when he said that. Like, when he said basically, I'm just saying that everybody just felt that way. That he was lying when he said he didn't take steroids, and then like about like just a couple months after this interview, he admitted that he took steroids and got suspended for like a year and a half, or something like that. But it was just amazing just listening to this, just listening to him, just really kind of almost like you could almost hear it, him pull back and in the cadence in what he says and in the qualifications.
In fact, and obviously on WFAN. First of all, and Jim, you can chime in where you have to. A-Rod, tell me what happened today.
That's his lawyer.
Well, we got a ruling that the commissioner does not have to come in from Milwaukee, and it was very disappointing. Obviously, I've been there for 10 or 12 days, whatever's been there for every pitch. I have my girls back home in Miami, and it's been difficult. But respecting the process, having been offered to come in a million shows, haven't done anything. It's just been really just taking it one day at a time and respecting the process. And today I lost my mind. I banged the table and kicked a briefcase and slammed out of the room and just felt like this system, I knew it was restricted, and I knew it wasn't fair. But what we saw,
kind of almost just letting him go unfettered without even challenging him. And sometimes it is actually a good idea to interrupt.
Today is just, it was disgusting. And the fact that the man from Milwaukee that put this suspension on me with not one
Talk about the baseball commissioner at the time.
bit of evidence, something I didn't do, and he doesn't have the courage to come look at me in the eye and tell me this is why I did 211. I shouldn't serve one inning. And this guy should come to our city. I know he doesn't like New York. I love this city. I love being a Yankee. My daughters grew up in New York. And for this guy, the embarrassment that he's put me and my family through, and he doesn't have the courage to come see me and tell me, this is why I'm going to destroy your career. And I have to explain this to my daughters every day.
So you thought now, Jimmy, you could chime on this too. You prepared, A-Rod. I mean, you have your list. Were you given any prior notice that the commissioner was not coming?
No, none whatsoever.
So you thought the commissioner would be there today?
No, we did not think he'd be here today.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Okay.
We had.
It's time to head here to get to the part where he's
on WFAN. First of all, and Jim, you can chime in where you have.
Come in a million shows, have restricted, and to come see me.
I want to see the outright denial that
So
comes
you
in.
thought the commissioner would be there today? Exploded. You got the definitive word that he was not coming to
Off. And at the end of the day, I always said to you and other media members, I will tell my story. I will have a platform and a forum. And I thought, rightfully so, this should end with Selig on Thursday and me on Friday under oath. Put your money where your mouth is.
So you were going to still testify.
Or we can go to Milwaukee and we can do it there. If he
but you were going to still testify.
Did not overreact in this today. That's not happening.
Time she's 9 on Monday, and I was here.
Just trying to get to the part where he just asked him straight out.
And you're saying now it's over. Witnesses says, did you do anything that they accuse you of doing? Nothing.
Nothing.
So you're guilty in your mind of nothing.
I feel like I should be there opening day.
Okay.
And that's what I'm working hard
So
for.
and let's get that on the record. You say you did not do these PEDs that they're accusing you of doing.
You're correct, Mike.
Okay. Okay. Now, where are we now?
There was so much evidence out there, so much reporting at the time, and good old Mike just could not counter with that.
Jim, where is this finalized now? Is this over, this arbitration hearing? Are we done with it? Or what? Let me ask you this from a legal standpoint, then I'll get back to A-Rod. What will baseball do now? Is this hearing over?
I mean, as if he just starts asking about the process and the whole thing. I was just really disgusted by this interview. Know a little bit. This came out. What are you talking about? There's so many times you see this on radio. You see this so many times in the way the media has been parsed out. You see things like, just like people becoming too cozy, too buddyish, that sort of thing, afraid to burn resources, afraid to like ruin a relationship. And like sometimes they have to go out on meals with some of these people. So it's so that's one of the big problems becoming friends. Now, it's interesting because when I teach writing for media, I actually have people especially like with asynchronous classes, I actually have people do things like do profiles on people. So I violate this rule myself when I have people like interview friends of theirs or that sort of thing for stories. I'm really just trying to like teach people like a craft. I'm not trying to get defensive here, but that sort of thing. And I basically say like, well, just make it easier on yourself. I'm trying, just interview people, roommate, that's friends, blah, blah, blah. If you're out there like making a living on this and that sort of thing, then it's really, you have to really be careful about, being too cozy with people. And then there's also a flip side with that because it could really prejudice your viewpoint, your writing, your information gathering, whatever. You might find yourself holding back unconsciously, that sort of thing. And then of course, like there's a flip side that too. Do you really want to ruin relationships too that you have with people? Better to just steer clear of that. Okay. Family members, that sort of thing. Okay. So anyway, so that's what a lot of this first part is about. Then it gets into like the stuff like where maybe the relationship, and this is where like, sometimes those relationships go even further down the road of like actually paying for sources. And which is amazing. And like I said, you'd be amazed at like how often this is done. Again, it's not just a National Enquirer thing. But the National Enquirer is actually known very well for doing it. So basically, there's the whole thing with basically like locking, there's like a way of like kind of locking down a source. And then what happens is that like, not only does it like maybe hurt your own credibility as a news gathering source, but also kind of hurts the story because it makes you almost like the only source. The source will only like these typical sources will only go to like that person who will pay them that now, they'll do that interview with 60 Minutes or something like that, which has, from what I understand, also paid for sources and that sort of thing. And they will and then they'll stop everywhere else. And maybe there's other places that actually have like other questions that need to be asked and that sort of thing, but they've been shut down. It was probably no better example of that, I would say, than I can call it up here. There was a candidate for president a long time ago, and actually he almost became vice president of the United States. His name was John Edwards. And this is the National Enquirer right here, and they broke this story about how he had a love child. Unfortunately, his wife has since passed away, but he had a love child with this woman, an extramarital affair, which he first denied, and then not only that, and then it was the National Enquirer. She discovered not only did he have an extramarital love affair, but he had a love child, a child out of wedlock, that sort of thing. He denied that too, but it was the National Enquirer that actually had this story first. But the reason why they had this story is because they paid for it, So this story, but the problem was I remember talking to other news organizations at the time, and they, felt like they had questions to ask too that were very much important. But also news organizations that were just so interested in the love triangle or the things or the romantic side of things or the sensationalist side of things. But like organizations are really interested in the news side of things because in 2004, this man came like within one state of becoming the vice president. I mean, John Kerry was the presidential nominee at the time. He was his vice presidential nominee, and they ran against George Bush in his second reelection, or for his reelection term, and Dick Cheney for his vice president. They won by only like not many electoral votes. And I think it was Ohio. If Ohio had flipped, it would have, and it came close, they would have gone to Kerry. It would have been only a one-term George Bush administration. So John Edwards was there, and then he ran for president in 2008, but he had to end it quickly because he just wasn't doing well against Obama and Hillary Clinton. But then other stuff came out during that campaign that just was not good. That would have like killed him anyway, I think. So yeah, anyway, there was a lot of stuff that came out about this, but just basically was just so totally locked down. Because of the National Enquirer's money monopoly on the story. There's pictures of him with the baby. I think they actually caught him in like some sort of a stairwell or something like that. So that's what happened with that. So so not only is it just like morally wrong, perhaps based on the ethical principles we talked about, but it's also like just not necessarily the greatest strategy. I mean, it's Okay, so maybe then you have to think about the contract you have with your audience, right? Remember we talked about that with Hobbes. So maybe the National Enquirer expects this, but if there are other organizations that engaged in this, I mean, they would probably harm their reputation because they're fully expected to be truly like objective organizations. If they also like, if you pay for an organization, wouldn't that source maybe like give you what you want to hear? You know, so how can you even trust the credibility of that? So maybe the National Enquirer can get away with that, but with CBS or CNN. So those are the things, kind of things you have to take kind of take into consideration. So it goes beyond just the moral, abject more lack of morality of it, but just just from a selling point is actually good for a respectable news organization to do that. Okay. So anyway, and there were actually sections that actually I had highlighted. I'm sorry about that. Let me get back to, I think I'd actually like moved ahead a little bit too much. Sorry about that. Okay. Working with sources. So let's go back to working with sources. The one thing they talk about in this chapter, which I think is also really important, is the problem with like your single source stories. Okay. And we talked a little bit about that, but I want to talk a little bit about that again. Because I talked a little bit about, I talked a little bit, I don't remember, about the Ahmaud Arbery case. And like when we rely too much on single source stories. And my oral organization, I wanted to show some examples of this because it was talked about before, but I want to show more specific examples. And it was talked about more extensively here. Single source stories were like a thing that back in my old news organization of Patch, where I think we went a little bit too heavy-handed in that, and we moved a little too quickly because we were understaffed, that whole thing. But we have things here like no injuries in the Cedar Bridge Avenue crash. It's probably not necessarily a big deal. I mean, other than people being hurt, which is a big deal to those people. But but is it really like something that is it always something that we have to rely on the police for? Because sometimes what we see actually, just trying to make sure that I got everything here. We actually see stories where like people have been hurt in an accident or something like that, but there's a lot more to it. Or maybe there's like somebody involved in that accident who was maybe like left out of the story or something like that. And and when people come a little too friendly with the police department, that's like one thing that can kind of happen. So so basically like and then what we also see is sometimes we see like lawsuits come out of this, which is not too cool. So and then we find out that there was a lot behind this that we didn't think of. Now I mean I'm not blaming there's so the news organizations are so like contracted these points and everything, and they don't really have the ability to do much of that right now. But maybe there is something behind this story that just goes beyond what the police says. A crash shut down Cedar Bridge Avenue, Old Hooper Avenue on Monday. It resulted in injuries, but they never really describe like what those injuries are, and it's only like 3 paragraphs long. And then, of course, that also makes me think again about the Ahmaud Arbery case, which started off with this kind of a story. Police are investigating the shooting death of a 25-year-old Brunswick man Sunday afternoon in the Satilla Shores neighborhood in southern Glenn County. According to police reports, Ahmaud Arbery died at the scene. And then basically just is still very much an active investigation, but couldn't give any more details at the time. Now, I mean, it's an active investigation, so you wouldn't expect them to actually come up with everything at the time, but that was basically how it was treated. It's almost, that story was like really not much longer than the actual story I just showed you with the accident at the intersection. So, and the police report, I mean, they do kind of give a little bit of a hint until like what happened here. They called it a homicide, but it didn't appear like anybody was really charged. Names were blackened out. Some of the witnesses here, and who were the witnesses? Okay, was it Travis McMichael was mentioned, and they almost seemed like blame like one person. That's it at the time, but were there more people involved? And then they kind of like have other sections here where they describe what was talked about here. Upon my arrival, I observed blah 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 this. was witnessing to the incident. And this is when they thought this was a black man who was jogging down the street. Some of these people thought he was the same guy. Apparently it was allegedly connected to some robberies in the neighborhood. So they went after him. Okay. And they killed him. And he said, Travis is the guy running down the street. Let's go. Stated he went to the bedroom and grabbed his 357 Magnum. That's great. His shotgun, because they didn't know if he was male and armed or not. He stated that Travis got in a truck and drove down the road. They saw the identified male running down the street. He came and he said, buddy attempted to block they attempted to block him, I guess. Yeah. And they stated that basically that he jumped into the bed of the truck, and he and Travis continued to in an attempt to, I don't know what Holmes means, attempt to intercept him. Intercept what? So basically it was a very bland report based on the witness reports. I said the man began to violently attack Travis, and the two men started fighting over the shotgun. So violently attack. Interesting. Okay, so they're making it sound almost as though it's like his fault. Then suddenly what emerged was a video. And this is like, again, where you just can't take maybe like one source's story in this kind of particular case. Okay. There was a video that emerged, and you may have seen this. I believe it didn't emerge for like a month or two later, but sometimes there's always somebody there. And actually, it was actually, I believe, the actual video that was actually taken by one of the people who was ultimately indicted and thrown into jail because and it came out and it was published, and it showed that actually not only was this guy Travis involved, but maybe there were other people involved too in enabling and letting this crime happen. Okay. And here it is again. That little like move of the camera right there was him cocking his gun, which was not picked up immediately by the police and showed that this guy was ready for a fight. And that's what got this guy into trouble. Okay. So, again, going beyond the single source, we find out other people helped engage in this violence that led to the death. And there's another click. Actually, maybe that was the clock. There's the shooting. And it doesn't really show much beyond that. But it goes to show that it appears that Ahmaud Arbery was actually defending himself, and he was not actually like attacking them, violently attacking them, as they said. Okay. That's why we really, and then basically there's actually like, they talk about how like this newspaper was like, actually one I just showed you, that reporter actually like stayed on that story, instead of just, sometimes you just can't get it all in one day. So he managed to get Arbery's name. He stayed in close involvement with the reporter, with the attorney's office, examining what happened. There was a lot of silence coming from the police department, that sort of thing. But he stayed on it, and he basically found out that that there was a video and every other elements that were picked up by investigators and needed to get out there. Okay. So that's basically probably the perfect example where you just can't rely on things. You do follow-up interviews, you interview maybe like eyewitnesses, you maybe interview people in the street who maybe like might have even like had a view of it. I'm not saying necessarily to do that on an accident at the intersection, but maybe sometimes you might hear a peep. You got to keep your eye open. Sometimes people will call you, they'll email you, they'll say like things like, you got to like make yourself like well known in the neighborhood or in the town, so people will think of actually going to you if they feel like they didn't get what they wanted, or didn't get their information out there like they did, and it's just stop with the police and that's it. Okay. I had to kind of stop for a bit because for some odd reason my computer was playing tricks on me, and I apologize for that. It's been a bit of a herky-jerky lecture, so the highlights on my book, and I told you that's important when I highlight something in a book, we're not showing up, so I actually had to kind of restart things. So let me now I'm actually seeing the highlights. So let me actually show that now. Okay, so basically I talked about selecting sources, today. So here's some areas I thought were important to the book to know in chapter 7. So today, newspapers and TV network journalists no longer about the single source stories, which stories I just talked about, why it's not good to just rely on like the police. They're commenting on local TV news. Reporters now get, but now they gather comments from official sources and then go to sources to ensure that their sources are balanced. But sometimes it's not good to necessarily, as I've talked before, to get like the both siderisms here, because like again, I've talked before about the January 6th or insurrection. That's is there really like two sides to that? I mean, to me, that's like a criminal affair, not necessarily a political affair. So just be careful. But it's always important to get more than one perspective to a story, as I just demonstrated with the Ahmaud Arbery case. And then of course, as I talked before, I talked about how like Fox News had the script ready for Obama, that sort of thing. What you see is basically you see like people who kind of almost like feed into that script. The whole thing with like, selecting fiery advocates, maybe people who you see them with these titles or something like that, that like, where did this person come from? I've never heard of this organization. Basically like kind of like liven up the newscast. I heard somebody talk about before about how the news used to be boring, but people would watch it anyway. And again, it was a comedian, but he was basically talking about how now like suddenly we're all in the lies. Maybe people found it like too boring, so they decided to just kind of spice it up this way. And so what they do is now instead of having like some sort of a balanced news report, especially on TV, you get the fiery people who kind of scream and yell and call people names and stuff like that. It seemed to kind of really start in the 80s when they started coming out with these TV shows. There was a show called the Morton Downey Jr. Show where they would kind of yell and scream at people. Actually, I could even call that up. So let's see here. You probably see there's still shows like, I don't even know if Jerry Springer is still on the air, but Jerry Springer was one of these people. Where like Geraldo had a show. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, I know this is actually. I mean, Al Sharpton, they really didn't deserve this.
Correct is the fact.
All this stuff. Just went on, and it's horrible. Somebody like writing this, but yeah, this was like, this is where a lot of people got their news. So, and they still do to this day. And now you just see a kind of more sophisticated version appear on these news shows where they yell and scream and that sort of thing. But see it happen in that program, The Five, a lot. Okay. Before I talked earlier, again, this is where the book talks about like not getting too cozy. Reporters' relationships with sources will vary widely. Reporters will develop purely business-like relationships. Reporter goes to the source with questions, blah, blah, blah. With other source reporters may have a little friendly relationship. And it's actually it's fine to be cordial, but again, not being too dependent. Okay. And I was supposed to not going to the well too many times. A young reporter outlined in a journalism discussion group she was having problems she was covering police. She admitted she had printed some newsworthy stories. If the police told her, they would prefer she didn't. Or if the police didn't want to give her the information she knew she was entitled, she was afraid to do anything. Even veterans like Carolyn Lowe in the opening of this chapter worry that if it pushed too hard for information to report something negative, they may lose sources. Okay. Well, there's a really an extension of what I was saying before. There's really like a delicate balance there. And I think it's not necessarily getting them to like you, but maybe getting them to respect you, knowing that you're a force out there, knowing that you're going to report the truth. So you want to make sure that you have the credibility and that they can take you seriously and that the readers will take you seriously. They're going to piss you off sometimes, and some people are going to shut you down even for telling the truth. And I've had to deal with it myself. I remember in the city of Hackensack, there was a very corrupt police chief there who was like, I caught him one time in a go-go bar that actually was an illegal go-go bar. Actually, it was a legal strip club. And I reported on it, and I told him I was going to do it while I was there. And he was actually acting, he was saying to me, why? But I said that basically it was illegal. This place was illegally operating, and there was a variety of reasons why it was illegally operating. But I had to report on it. But look, but he took it very personally. That happens, and he didn't talk to me. He didn't really talk to me anyway. But I think he actually did continue talking to me. He wasn't like he totally shut me down because I got the story right, and he knew that I was out there and he had to deal with me, and that was it. So, I talked about the friendship angle, when reporters become friends. Um, reporters and their sources often share common interests. No wonder that friendships can develop between coaches and sports writers. It happens a lot in sports. It's more, a lot of them are teachers. Maybe they're people they graduated with, but it's really something you still have to find a way to draw a line. I've had to deal with that myself in my hometown of Point Pleasant, New Jersey. But sometimes, and then sometimes you get it like too far. You got Judith Miller, who had a relationship, and she basically helped spin the Iraq War 20 years ago and make it look like this good thing that was going to happen. But she had this relationship with a source that was apparently like got romantic, and she apparently knew the lies and spun them, and now she's being used as a pundit on Fox News, which is interesting. So, and of course, I talked about the paying for news angle of things. And so that's it with that end of things, and that's it with the book. All right. So that was just basically the chapter on sources. Okay, your next one will be on the government watch, which is kind of an extension, and then of course chapter 9. Top of that, that'll be the next thing. Then that'll be the last things we'll be going over in terms of the book, which will be done during the next lecture. Okay. All right. So actually, that's all I have, guys, for this week. Not much to talk about other than that. So just let me know if you need any other help with anything. Okay, and I will be talking to you. Thanks very much.